Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic, as always. This week we're going to talk about a number of things, but the overall bearing theme on this week's episode is going to be a star student for both your CFI and your DPE. I think as a student pilot back in the day, I can remember both wanting to impress my CFI and wanting to impress my DPE. I'm not sure it was always possible. Well, in hindsight, I know it wasn't possible. But I think that these are tips and tricks for student pilots of any caliber of pilot, instrument, private, commercial, CFI, whatever that might be, that would make you a star for your CFI and a star for your DPE. Wally, you've seen a lot. We joked about a lot of things. We'll get to the DPE part later, but a little tease. You know when you walk in the room whether that person's prepared or not.
Yeah, pretty much. You can, first of all, the fact that they're there on time is check number one.
There you go.
And by and large, I've never really had an issue with that. The times that maybe someone's running late, they get in touch and say, hey, this is going on in my life, and it's totally understandable. I get that. But, yeah, you get a pretty good sense of, when you ask for a document, a required document, and they kind of give you a funny look, it does kind of set the expectations that, oh, okay, maybe we have some issues here.
Yep. And I think the same thing goes for flight instruction. When you're meeting your flight instructor, obviously we want to be on time, and there's ways that can make that lesson or that day go a lot better, no matter what the content of that day is. And I think those are some of the things we're going to share today. So we are using an article that we found in AOPA Flight Training Magazine, one of my favorite magazines. It's really stacked with content. So if you're not a member of the AOPA, I'll encourage you to go out and become a member of the AOPA, and you'll get a free subscription to Flight Training Magazine. Lots of really good stuff in there. But May 2019, they ran an article called Star Student, and it was really all about the flight instructor piece. And then Wally's going to jump in and share some of his thoughts as it relates to DPEs and what he thinks would make you a star applicant for a DPE. So go check out the AOPA and their Flight Training Magazine. But let's start first with CFIs. I think all CFIs that have given 200 or 300 hours of dual instruction at a flight school would say the best thing, the biggest thing that a student could do is come prepared. While you've given a lot of dual instruction, it's a big deal if your student's ready for that day compared to a student's not. True or false?
Absolutely. I mean, anything in life, being prepared as best you can, coming with questions. You don't have to know all the answers, but coming with questions and, saying to the instructor, hey, I was reading this and I don't understand what they mean by saying this. What's that all about? And that kind of, as an instructor, it says, okay, yeah, this is going to probably be a very successful day.
Well, no matter what the topic is, if we're intrigued by the student, we all like to teach something. We all like to teach it better to someone who's interested in it. So that's going to spark the conversations for sure. And as I've continued to learn around here, not every student understands really what the anatomy of a flight lesson should look like. And if a CFI is driving what that anatomy of a flight lesson looks like, students should also know that they can control some of that. And by that I mean, how much time do we spend on the ground before we go to the aircraft? How much time do we spend around the aircraft, in the aircraft, and then back on the ground when we get back? Of course, content is going to matter. If you're working on cross-country components of your private pilot certificate, you're probably going to spend more time in the plane than you do on the ground, but maybe not if you haven't done your flight plan together yet, right? And the more and more that a student comes prepared for whatever that lesson is, the better off they're going to be. And I would say CFIs, flight school owners, people that run a flight school say if the student can own their training a little bit based on a syllabus that they've agreed to use, whether the student's asked to use it or the school uses a syllabus or some combination thereof, and you know what you're working on next or what you didn't finish the last lesson, that's going to help everybody involved. It is tough for these flight instructors who may be flying with 15 or 20 people, 7 to 12 very regularly, 6 to 8 of them not so regularly, and somebody walk in and they say, I want to work on the thing we didn't finish last time. It's unlikely that flight instructor is going to remember what that exactly was if there's not a system or tool in place to manage that for them. And even if there is, it's going to be tough for them to probably pull that up, relive that lesson. It's easy for a student to come in and say, look, we didn't quite nail steep turns last time. We said we were going to work on steep turns a little bit. I'm still struggling with the concept of horizontal lift versus vertical lift. Maybe we could whiteboard that for a few minutes before we go out there so we're not spending time in the plane flying circles talking about vertical versus horizontal lift. And then I'll do better this time around, right?
Yeah.
A student can own that. They can bring that to the lesson that day. You could go watch a bunch of YouTube videos, come in and say, hey, these are the questions I have. I just don't quite understand this. I was a terrible student. I remember I probably came 3 rainy days in a row and said, I didn't do any homework on airspace. I need you to teach it to me again. And that spoon feeding was something that I was willing to pay for, but what I really didn't realize back then was that it wasn't helping me learn airspace any better. I was just watching a live YouTube video of a guy teaching me Alpha, Bravo, Charlie.
Right.
And until I really put in the work myself, I wasn't going to get any better at airspace. And I would challenge all the students out there, be on time, but come prepared for your lesson as well. Come with those questions. Own it to the best of your ability based on some form of a syllabus. It's not about just coming and putting more time in butt in seat in the aircraft. It's really about progressing in the knowledge and learning what you're trying to learn that's going to make you a better pilot.
Yeah. You know, one thing that you can do, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find a trainer airplane for $120 an hour, but just to make the math nice and easy, $120 an hour is $2 a minute. $180 is $3 a minute, and so you can kind of figure out you're paying between $2 and $3 a minute for, you know, on a $150 an hour airplane. You know, you can do so much. I know with our 172, I took a picture of the panel, and then I went to some, I don't even know who I did it through, but through an online service, I was able to get a poster size, basically a poster of the panel of our 172. And we put it in a little poster frame, and it hung around our house for years. It's still there. And, you know, when I would be working with my daughters on whatever certificate or rating it was, we would have that panel right there, and they were very familiar with where all the switches are. You know, I heard a couple instructors here today talking about sitting in a multi-engine airplane and doing a lot of just going through checklists, learning where the switches are. Now, multi-engine airplanes, you know, sometimes up to $300 an hour. That's $5 a minute you're spending. Every minute you're pulling out a $5 bill and putting it down. And probably most flight schools, you probably have the ability to go sit in an airplane. And, you know, obviously you don't want to drain the battery or anything like that, but you can learn where the alternator switches are, learn where the alternate air, the cowl flaps, just get used to where it is. And so much of that can be done. And, I mean, you're sitting in a real airplane, so, or you know, maybe you got a poster, but for very inexpensive, you can probably get a poster of the panel of the airplane that you fly on a regular basis.
No doubt. And we at this flight school let people we put our planes in the hangar on external power all the time so they can learn the systems and see what the GPS looks like. There's GPS simulators. You go to Garmin, just search Google for Garmin 430 simulator, and you can find a simulator where you can play with it all you want to play with it, right? To be more prepared and come with questions and know exactly what you want to ask. But the poster's a great idea, and it will make you better if you get to spend time away working on that, not just the time you're here in training playing with the panel. So once you come prepared and you've studied, I think as the lessons progress, the next thing really is practicing the maneuvers, not necessarily in the airplane, right? I think we, meaning me, didn't do a good job of that when I was a student either. I think I knew the maneuvers I would probably be asked to do on a check ride, probably based on a gouge of some sort, that you're going to do this. And I worked on those about to the level that I thought I was going to be asked to demonstrate them. And I didn't really put into practice necessarily all the reasons that those were going to make me a better pilot one day, to the point of, I would go practice S-turns at the level of, okay, I need to be at 1,000-ish feet. I need to make my wings start level, get back to level again. If I do it in light winds, I know I'm not going to do much correction. But I really didn't pay attention to the ACS. I didn't know if it was 50 feet. If I came out on my headings wrong, what were those limitations? And so I was really more going through the motions. I didn't really know when I finished a maneuver. I can remember when I did steep turns and turns around a point, all that stuff, we would finish the maneuver, and I'd kind of look over my CFI, and what I was waiting to hear was met expectations or met the minimums or didn't meet the minimums. Was this a check ride pass or not a check ride pass? And that was kind of my barometer on, was it good enough or not good enough? I don't remember knowing those answers myself. And I think as a student pilot, you should be aware of what's expected of you, not just whether or not your CFI thinks that it meets expectations. So chair fly maneuvers, use the cockpit poster to fly maneuvers, practice those maneuvers, use a maneuvers guide. If you don't have one, download our maneuvers guide so you can understand really what maneuvers you need to do and what the expectations are. You're probably, we'll skip ahead a little bit, you're probably not going to impress a DPE if you start a maneuver and say, I'm going to do my clearing turns now, and never look out the window.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I encourage instructors to not use the term clearing turns, but rather use the phrase clear the area. I go back to my flight training, which was a long time ago, and it was very robotic for me. Okay, let's do stalls. Okay, I'm going to do a 90-degree turn this way and then a 90-degree turn that way. And I know my head was inside looking at the heading indicator and probably not outside. So it's kind of semantics, I guess you might say, but maybe for you instructors, maybe saying to your student, okay, let's clear the area, is better than saying, let's do clearing turns. Clearing turns almost sounds like we're doing a little maneuver here. We're going to turn here, we're going to turn here, or however you want to do it, 180 or whatever. That's not the point. But, say, let's clear the area, I find kind of says, yeah, let's really look outside. So that's just a very, a technique.
Yeah, and I don't become too dependent on what you might have in the cockpit for traffic either, because it's not just airplanes that you're trying to clear the area with. You're trying to clear the area for gliders, big birds, balloons, towers, lots of other stuff that might not be on that pretty screen that you look at all day. You are trying to really clear the area for anything that might sneak out and cause you to have a really bad day. And I think that's important if we are telling students to own their training. CFIs, you have to let the student own it some, but then you have to teach in a way to where they can own it. I think a bunch of shortcuts and cheat sheets and things like that are what flight training has become. and it's not really doing the overall aviation industry a lot of good. And I'm sure Wally will talk about it on check rides and DPE, how to be a star for your DPE. But if you're teaching an instrument student how to learn how to fly under instrument flight rules, and every time you talk about an alternate, all you guys and girls say is 1, 2, 3, that's not teaching them the reasons and numbers that they need to fly an alternate. It's a shortcut to the greater good. It would seem to make sense to Wally and I that you teach the reasons that you would need to file the alternate and use that 1, 2, 3 more as a backup. Wally, what are your thoughts there on that?
Yeah, absolutely. On instrument check rides, 100% of my applicants will be asked the question, when is an alternate required? And I would say 75% of the time, the applicant says the 1, 2, 3 rule. Well, that doesn't really answer the question. It's like me saying to someone, do you want to go to lunch? And they say, I'm hungry. I guess I could infer that the fact that they said I'm hungry, yeah, they want to go to lunch. But
not if they don't have no money.
Right. It doesn't really answer the question. So I'll say, okay, well, what's the 1, 2, 3 rule? And then they'll usually get it. They'll say, well, okay, your ETA plus or minus an hour, ceiling of 2,000 feet, 3 miles visibility. If it's less than that, an alternate airport is required. I'll say, okay. But occasionally I'll ask that question and they'll just throw out 1, 2, 3 rule, and very proud to answer it that way. And I'll say, well, what is the 1, 2, 3 rule? It says, well, ceiling must be greater than 1,000 within 2 hours of your ETA and 3 miles visibility. Of course, that's wrong. So, when I ask the question, I mean, my preference would be for the applicant to just answer the question, within 1 hour of my ETA, a 2,000-foot ceiling, and 3 miles visibility. So I think what instructors are doing, it's the old law of primacy. I think when they're saying, with an instrument student, I think that the instrument, they're saying, okay, well, we need to talk about alternates. It's the 1, 2, 3 rule. And that's the first thing that the student hears. Another one is, I'll ask, again, on an instrument check ride, and again, 100% of my applicants are going to get this question. I'd like to think 100% of all instrument students all over the country would get this question. I will ask, what are the recency of experience requirements for instrument flying? And 90% of the time I get 6 hits. And I'll say, okay, well, what is 6 hits? And most of the people are pretty good with this one, but I had an applicant the other day say to me, okay, it's 3 approaches within the preceding certain amount of months, and at that point he said, can I look this up? And I said, yeah, you can look it up. And then he came back and he says, well, wait a minute, it's 6 approaches, and he got it right, and I was kidding with him. I said, why would the phrase 6 hits? Where does 3 approaches come? How does 3 fit into 6 hits? And he kind of, oh yeah, okay. So
I got to do it twice.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a person who just remembered the little gouge, 6 hits, and I don't think that to use that as a memory aid after you've taught this to your student, I guess is an okay thing. I will ask maybe about inoperative equipment. For maybe a private or a commercial, and they just look at me and they go, "A tomato flames." I go, "What is that?" And but they were really proud to throw out A tomato flames.
What's
to me.
the multi-engine for declaring what VMC is? It's like suck from or something like that.
Oh yeah.
another acronym that we all use to help us remember if we forgot one. But I think that should be something you keep in your brain and use as a memory tool. But as you're talking, I'm reflecting on my training days, going, wow, I remember that they would write on the board. We would talk about alternates, and they would write 1, 2, 3, and it wasn't just that we used it as a memory aid. We were using it as a teaching aid. And I'm thinking right now, as we're on this show, we might have a problem where we need to really work at the basics of teaching the course, and then using that as an end part of the course, like a wrap up. Like, this is how you can remember this thing,
right?
But teach it all the right way,
right?
And then use that as a catch all at the end. Not to write 8 tomato flames on the board, but maybe write down the things we need and go, oh, look, if you notice, it also spells 8 tomato flames. This could be the end of your lesson memory aid, but not the beginning lesson memory aid.
Exactly. Exactly.
Avenue F was another one that we did, right? And that's the what altitude should you fly? I'm trying to remember this in real time. So that was, what altitude should you fly if you lose comms? It was your assigned, vectored, expected, and then filed in that order. So everybody remembered Avenue F. And while I can still remember Avenue F, and that's what put that together, I don't think we should write that on the board first and say these are the reasons, because there's a philosophical reason why if you were assigned an altitude, you should stay on that altitude. If you weren't assigned an altitude, but were previously vectored on one, you should stay on that altitude. If they told you to expect something, well, it makes sense that you change to that altitude, right? And I think the fundamental learning of that's more important than the Avenue F, but might be at the end of the game. But if your DP asks you, what altitude should you fly? I don't think you should lead with Avenue F. That might throw them off.
This may sound strange, but I've never heard that in my life. I just learned something. I've never heard of Avenue F.
I just gave Wally a secret.
I do know there is a street up in Anchorage that is called F Street, and there's a little pilot hangout there called F Street Station that I've been to a time or two. So if any of you are in Anchorage, I would recommend checking out F Street Station.
Well, back to the title of the show, becoming a star student or being a star applicant, I think the key is what really will do that for you is understanding the material, maybe using a few less shortcuts, owning your training some that maybe isn't expected on day one, but is something you can do more over time. And then flight instructors, you letting them own it by not necessarily giving them all the shortcuts at the beginning so that the primacy doesn't set in and that they can learn it more and more. And then with your DPE, come prepared, be on time, all those same things, but don't answer in acronyms and shortcuts and things like that you may have learned or use as memory aids, because it's not going to be what your DBE is expecting on that check ride. Yeah. Now, if we could rewind and I said, Wally, what would I have done differently as a student pilot, no matter instrument, commercial? The book work would have been completely different. Now, I could sit here and preach like I would do it different, but the book work's hard stuff, right? We talk about the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. It's some 450 pages, big pages, lots and lots of words. That's tough to go home and just sit down and read it and consume it. But if you do read it, it's very interesting topics. There's good material in there. But let's assume that's more of a reference. How would I have done it differently? I think I would have watched more videos. I think I would not have tried to focus on the written exam. I still hear it every day. I met a young man and his wife last weekend at the flight school, and we had a number of email exchanges where he said, I'm working on my written material now. I'll probably start flight training in the September timeframe once I've taken my written exam. And gave him some feedback, didn't think that was the most important way to approach it. He disagreed in the subsequent follow-up. And a couple days later, he says, you know what, we've talked about it, and we understand your logic. We'd like to come in and talk about getting started on flight training. Well, during that conversation, we talked about book work and all these things. While it's important, you're not going to be a great pilot if you take the knowledge exam before you come take your first flying lesson.
Yeah.
and that just doesn't make logical sense. So it doesn't save you a penny. It doesn't make you any better a pilot. And I think what scared him or made the light bulb come on was when I reminded him that if you miss 20, let's say you miss 10 questions, do you really want to talk to a designated pilot examiner 9 months from now about the things that you didn't know 9 months ago before you started flying in that check ride? The light bulb went off for him, and he's like, I think I'll wait and take that test once I've been in the plane a little bit more.
Yeah.
It just makes a lot of sense. So I think I would have watched more videos. I think I would have learned more about what's going on, both aerodynamically and then kind of systemsly in the aircraft and with the aircraft that I was flying. I think that would have made me a much better retainer of the information as a student pilot. And then I think maneuvers and ACS would have been in my repertoire. I don't think I knew. I think I knew at a steep turn level only that I had 100 feet. That might be the only thing that I really knew in the ACS as a student pilot.
Yeah.
I don't think I understood really the ACS on turns around a point, S turns, definitely not stalls. I just didn't want to start a spin. I was really not very well educated back in those days on what was expected.
Yeah, there are so many good reference materials out there, and you mentioned videos, Bobby. I mean, back in my day, we didn't really have that. I mean, the internet didn't exist when I was learning, I should say. But now there are so many good references. Just be careful that you got a reputable reference. It's not Joe's learnhowtofly.com, where he has his own ways of doing things that may not be really the way they ought to, according to the ACS and that sort of stuff. But, we've mentioned on this show so many times that the airplane is a terrible classroom. And the economics of it are, again,
horrible.
At $180 an hour with an airplane and an instructor. I mean, that's $3 a minute. And so a lot of this stuff that you can do at home just by referring to this. And again, you look at the Airplane Flying Handbook, the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, you might look at it and go, my gosh, that's an intimidating book. I don't think that's a book that you read. It's a book that you refer to. There are little chunks in there that you're going to read. I still read it. I'm still having light bulb moments. I'm reading the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. I'm going, oh wow, that's really interesting. That's a great way of putting this. And it here I am, 40 some odd years of flying airplanes and instructing, and I'm still getting good things by reading this stuff.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's always something to learn, and I am learning still. You're learning still. The book work is something that every pilot could put more time into for sure to become a better student of aviation and then pass those lessons on to others. I think that's probably the last tip I'll give today is if you can teach any of the material, whether you're a private student or not, and I encourage everybody that comes here for onboarding and wants to learn how to fly and they say they want to be a professional pilot, I tell all of them, start thinking and acting like a CFI today. When you have your first lesson on airspace, you go home and write how you would teach that back to yourself or to other students. Because if you start doing that when you're a private student, you're going to be a great CFI one day.
Yeah.
You're going to hear acronyms and words you didn't understand when you were a 4-hour pilot. Make sure you don't say those acronyms and things when you're a CFI, and make notes and start your lesson plans. It doesn't have to truly be lesson plans, but a journal of what you heard and learned during airspace, so that when you have 265 hours and you pass your CFI check ride and you look back at that material and go, I didn't really like the Bravo is for big planes acronym. That didn't really help me. You won't remember that 265 hours from now if you don't make notes and start thinking like a CFI early on in your flight training. because you, like the rest of us, will have 200 plus hours and won't talk like a brand new pilot anymore. So start thinking early like a flight instructor. If you want to be a professional pilot and want to instruct, it'll make your lesson plans and your content that you deliver much, much better. So to recap, to be a star student, own your training, come prepared, come on time, make sure you have questions, make sure your flight instructor is doing their part to help you own the training by listening to the things that you're not understanding, by helping you by saying clear the area instead of make your clearing turns.
Right.
It's not just 90 degrees this way, 90 degrees back. And then when you do get that day to meet that DPE, you can become a star applicant by doing a lot of the same things, being on time, being prepared, maybe not using as many of the shortcuts and acronyms, but know the material and answer the questions as they are intended to be answered. And your DPE will probably give you a nice sheet of paper when you leave that day, which will be your first flight certificate or many ratings there to follow. So as always, be on time, be prepared, stay behind the prop, and fly safely.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.